My name is Per Tesch. I'm an exercise physiology by training, so not that far, but I'm certainly not in the business of hamstring exercise, and hamstring injury prevention. The reason why I initiated this is more of a, let's say, long-term interest in sports, combining physiological biomechanical issues, having some knowledge about muscle use, forces, weight training, putting all these pieces together. That's been sort of intriguing to me, how you can evolve the whole business of hamstring training and hamstring injury prevention. It's interesting because at this time when you say hamstring, most people immediately associate with injuries. You don't associate with hamstring performance. We're all aware of all the stars, especially the strikers who have suffered from hamstring injuries in the past. Just this past season, we had a bunch of the leading scorers like Messi, Ronaldo, Diego Costa, Zlatan Ibrahimovic, all injured and out of play from a few weeks to several months. One of the talks today that will follow my intro here is one that will deal with significant costs to the player as a result of these injuries. But what I like to emphasize with this meeting, and hopefully we have a constructive interaction on this, is how critical is hamstring training for speed and power. Totally ignored, in my opinion. And this is something that struck me years ago in the gym. If you look at the different exercises you have for the quads, typically people do like 4 or 5 exercises, doing squats, knee extensions, hack squats, etc., emphasizing the quads, but very few, typically 1 or 2 for the hamstring. That has changed in the past, but just look at the equipment in a gym. 1 or 2 machines for the leg curls and multiple exercises for the quads. So why is it so? The other thing that's pretty amazing and remarkable, that again, why devoting so much time on the quads when the complexity of the anatomy and the function is totally different between the 2 muscles. The quadriceps being pretty straightforward muscle group with 3 working in concert, and the 4th muscle supporting and occasionally working in concert, while the hamstring muscles are so much more complicated in terms of function and of course anatomy, dictating different functions. Now, what does it take to prevent a hamstring injury? And of course, this will be in topic today, and several of the talks will certainly focus on what's needed to maintain or develop function, enhance speed and power, using specific hamstring exercises.
The topic of today, of course, is the particular type of injuries that seem to be the most frequent and harmful kind of injuries. In world football, a hamstring. That's from the statistics. The UEFA Elite Club injury study is the basis for my presentation, and I have to thank him for providing that comprehensive material for the world of football to consider. Just a few words on the background of this study. In my view, sports is not science, but most of the elements in sports is. So the role of medicine in football has become crucial in the modern day game, with UEFA making its own vital contribution to the areas of football medicine, injuries, and sports science, screening, anti-doping, symposiums, education programs, and injury studies. Over an 11-year period, the injury study covered a broad range of issues. Professor Ekstrand et al. Highlighted the study findings, especially the evidence that player injuries had a significant impact on teams' successes. That is, results being affected by the absence of key components or players of a team owing to injury.
Well, Robert Hanade, nice to have you here in the seminar. I would just like to have you comment on mostly the economical impacts of hamstring injuries today in football and what development, both nationally and internationally, you would like to see to make this better.
Well, since we have noticed that hamstring causes injuries at a very high rate, we know that it's costly for the players, the clubs, the associations, whoever. And I think that something has to be done about this. And I think it was an excellent idea to start this discussion. We have seen a lot of research projects around in Europe, and I think most of them show that something should be done and developed further. I think the notion that there is a lot of money involved, we are fully aware of that, but it's not only the money, it's actually the entertainment side of it has been developed to very, very high level. And I think the attraction is necessary to include most players. They should be on the pitch, not in training sessions or rehab centers or whatever. So this is something that is a responsibility of football, to take care of their players.
Do you think there could be something done here in Sweden, for instance, on a national level with the Football Association, that they should take some kind of initiative to deal with these issues?
Well, I'm not so certain, but I think this is something that we would certainly try. We would like to have somebody showing more interest in this respect. I've been contacting the Svensk Elitfotboll, the Swedish league, you could say, and I think that they are really the organization that should take responsibility to try to cope with this.
Would you say that they are aware today of the seriousness of this issue with hamstring injuries?
I'm not sure. I don't. In fact, I don't think they are. So this is something that we have to give them more information and try to get them to focus on this problem.
Well, I'm a guy born and raised here in Stockholm, and I played for Brommapojkarna most of my career, and I've also been a professional player in Brussels and in Hammarby. As Robert said, the peak of my career was two games for the national team of Sweden. And nowadays I spend my days as a doctor, and I have just graduated 1 year ago from Karolinska Institutet, and soon enough I will be also a true doctor after my internship. I've been fortunate. I haven't had too much injuries at all. I think I had 1 week of absence due to a hamstring injury, so I'm not very well experienced in that sense. But maybe I'm not very representative for all the players, because I have my background as a doctor, and I trust evidence. I want someone like Carl to tell me, if you do this, I can prove this is better training for you than this. But I know that most players, they have another idea of what is good, and I think most of them, they just listen to what other players have experienced before. And if they hear that Messi is doing this to prevent prevent injuries, then I will do the same. I think also the researchers, or me as a doctor, or anyone here working as a physiotherapist, it's very much our responsibility to take the evidence and put it in the squads. And because the players, they're not trained to look at things from a scientific point of view.
When you were a soccer player, when you're conditioning coach, because obviously one thing that I do acknowledge is that soccer players follow what the coach says, right? How much of your time were you conscious about focusing on training hamstrings?
I did not focus on training hamstrings more than maybe a few weeks after my injury, and I think that's it.
So is the same, sorry to interrupt, but is the same tendency as many players that only when you get injured from the hamstring, you start focusing more on the hamstring? Is that correct?
That is definitely correct.
Okay.
I'm a former soccer player myself. I was active during the 90s. And I think it's important to tell all that, I mean, get this message out to the coaches, because as a soccer player you listen to your coach and they can implement the training in the training sessions. Because we had a lot of talks, people came to us and talked about training and nutrition and everything, and somehow you don't take your own responsibility when you're a young player, and I think if you can get the coaches to understand the importance of this, they can implement it in, you know, the warm-up and specialized strength sessions and things, because that's somebody that you actually listen to and you look up to.
Yeah, the coaches, they are important.
They are
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. Getting together and share knowledge like this, and to get information from authorities in the field, that must be helpful. That if I can really tell my players or my colleagues that, well, I have really talked to someone who is examining this or making studies, proving what is good and what is not good, it must be helpful. So I think this is a good way to at least extend the knowledge.
I'm going to talk about the clinic way of treating injuries, in this case hamstrings. But I can put this model on every kind of injury. So I want to find a diagnosis with my assessments and then a treatment.
I'm going to talk about our interventions at Optimal Physique, how we treat the injuries locally with what we call the high-tech interventions. As you said before, I'm a physical therapist. I also went to Karolinska. I did my master's there too. So the neurometabolic myofascial treatment model is based on the following. First, we do diagnostic ultrasound, of course, and our manual diagnostics. We do the EPI. I'm going to speak briefly about that. We can talk more about it later, but I just want you to get an idea what it is and how it works. We do a taping technique. Krista spoke about McConnell technique and Chinese technique, and Mulligan. We use the yo-yo technology for the eccentric training to give the tissue the proper load.
The typical situation on the real world of training is that there is a big problem with the knowledge transfer between different areas. Why? My opinion is mainly related to egos, okay? Because head coach, big ego, fitness coach, big ego, physiotherapist, big ego, medical doctors, big ego, researchers, biggest ego. So at the end, it's impossible to really transfer the knowledge, because I think I'm the best, and when I look at the head coach, I say, no, he doesn't know anything about injury prevention or whatever. So if we don't do an effort to make this mix between different areas and topics, it's impossible to do a proper job. When you don't have many time to develop your training programs, if you have a weekly training session for all the players, you are very lucky. This is the best thing you could have. Once a week, this is the best. And most of the time, you don't train because you have games during the week. So you need to convince the players to do the training with you on a personal basis, outside from the, let's say, team structure. So you need to convince them personally, okay? So important thing is this message. Those players who had a ratio between hamstring eccentric maximal force and quadriceps concentric maximal force higher than 1.40, they did not have any hamstring injury. So that means that if the balance between hamstring eccentric strength and quadriceps concentric strength is very, very high and going to the eccentric part of the hamstring, you will have lower options to get injury in your hamstring. Let's try to explain why eccentric overload is working. This is at least my opinion. I guess we have on the left a real structural or fiber or architecture modification, and on the right part, a functional optimization. You really could improve power and real task or specific performance if you are able to introduce eccentric overload on specific movements, as we are going to see later. I tried to make numbers, and I found out that at Juventus, during the first season I worked there, the value of the team was 100 million euros. When I make my numbers about how much it costs a lost game, it was near 100,000 euros. So I use this number and I compare this season with the previous 4 ones. And my numbers was that the club gained 12 million euros because they were using more players than during the 4 previous seasons. Unfortunately, I did not receive any bonus for this, but this is the numbers.
First, I would like to, of course, thank the people that have organized this for allowing me to present, which I think will be a cutting-edge research study about hamstrings injury prevention, or at least that's what we are looking for. We have heard today a lot of data about hamstrings injuries, and most of it is quite striking about the high cost that hamstrings injuries have for both players and teams. But just to give you another example in numbers, Messi, the one in the middle, and actually it's the picture that Per used before, I think you was told to me, but he was away at least 60 days during this season for hamstrings injury issues. These 60 days represented 2.7 million euros for FC Barcelona only in salary, without counting the losses in souvenirs, in less people going to matches. I mean, 2.7 million euros. That's for one injury that perhaps could have been prevented. And interesting that, as Per said in the introduction, the 3 best strikers in La Liga have been injured this season due to biceps femoris problems. So this data clearly show that in football there is an urgent need for hamstrings injury prevention strategies. Most of the knowledge about hamstring prevention is based on the experience of the coaching team. And I think from a scientific point of view, the information we have about hamstrings exercise that may serve as a tool to reduce injuries is extremely limited when we compare it with the quadriceps, for example. I would say the ratio in scientific literature between studies assessing quadriceps and hamstrings is you get 20 studies working with quadriceps and maybe one study working with hamstrings. And that's a bit surprising.
This is a great event. It's a first way to bring awareness about a big problem that we have in the industry. And I refer industry not just by football, I refer by industry in terms of activity, in terms of fitness, exercising, could be high performance, could be just general fitness. I think that hamstring injury is something that we don't really think about until it happens. I think hamstring injury is something that we will probably focus more on what is visually attractive to us, and hamstring is one of those things that's really physically nothing that we put an interest on. So today's presentation was particularly important for me to focus on what people around the world are thinking about. I think the key word here is awareness, and then really understanding that awareness is not just pre, it's actually post the action or the effect, you know, in this case. There's nothing better than education, and that could include research and development, that it could include events such as this ones, that we have people who really spend most of their lives just doing research on this, and then really are willing to share to people like us who want to learn. And then this is going to help us be better.